Hi, I'm Mafi, and I am a trans girly. This is going to be a long ramble about my transitioning journey. At the start of it all, I wish I had something like this to refer to. Not that everyone transitioning will have the same exact experiences, but some level of knowing what could come next is comforting. This is also a way that can convey in one big video just how I've been feeling and what I've been experiencing, whether it be to my friends, my active and supportive viewers, or to anyone curious about how it's been. This is for you. I don't usually make videos with clear structure like this, but as I ramble, I will segment it into parts that make sense to me. And this in turn can help you skip around to parts of the video you were most interested in, so let's go over that. The first part of the video is going to be me breaking down the lead up to my transition. This will include my personal thoughts I'd have over those years. The next will be leading to my transition, detailing on how I decided to come out, and thoughts and feelings about that part of my life. And the last part will detail a lot of the changes and experiences I've gone through so far during my transition. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Starting from as young as 8 or 9, I often found myself thinking about things that typical young boys probably wouldn't. Things like, I want to present more feminine, I want to dress more feminine, and would even go as far as to identify as female virtually when the internet started to become a mainstay in our daily lives. Along with this, I got into some other things. One of them was soccer. I would live, breathe, and play it all the freaking time. And to this day, it's still one of my top interests. My other interest was, well, being a weeb, playing games, and watching anime, thus having two completely different sides to my life forming. On one side of my life came a lot of conversations that were about soccer, and with it came a lot of laddie talk. As someone who didn't even understand what I was experiencing with my gender identity properly, I quickly realized that this isn't the place to express that. As we all tried to make it big or give it our best to be a footballer one day, the ideology of manning up often made me feel like I had to overcompensate with a facade just to fit into the social groups forming. And that other aspect of my life that involved anime and gaming, or I should say side of my life, in the other part of my life involving anime and gaming, I felt like I was expressing myself far more freely. These environments consisted of people of a lot of different diverse backgrounds and different orientations, and I grew to feel very, very comfortable in this space. This is where I'd meet some of my closest friends over the years, and if there was ever a place to start putting up a real effort to self-discover, I'd always felt it was here. By the time I hit high school, one interest took over my life more than the other. I was very deep into the soccer scene, and due to the culture around it and the urgency to try to break through as a young player, I became engulfed in ideologies of manning up along with my training, thus suppressing a lot of the free expression I had previously experienced. At this point, any hint of exploring alternative forms of gender expression were completely suppressed. I couldn't have the lads thinking that I was any form of LGBTQ, otherwise I'd worry socially for the worst. There were moments such as the maid cafe that my high school anime club ran where I had dressed up as a maid, where I was like, wow, this is kinda nice. But I was quick to brush it off as just a bit. Then came university, where it actually got even worse. You know those Tate-esque grind setters that are always fixated on doing something all the fucking time? Yeah. I got roped into that very early on in my tenure at university from somebody that is no longer in my life. They were a fun person, but both of us were seeking some sort of direction in our lives, and long story short, I realized that this was not the direction that fit me best. COVID then preceded this, and this is where I found myself back online more and more often. This was the place I had grown up to feel more comfortable in, and despite my strong interest in soccer, I quickly welcomed its permanent fixture in my life again. One thing led to another, from dipping into content creation, to then streaming, to back to this again. I had met a lot of new friends, even more accepting and even more welcoming than before. Over this content creation era, I'd also taken the time to not only finish university, but also to figure out how I wanted to be perceived. A big part of Vtuber living ends up being how your OC looks and conveys itself to other people. And I always thought it was a good way of initially expressing that. At first, it was just a male model based off Nate from Pokemon Black and White 2. And then it became a femboy with long hair that I once again thought I was doing just for a bit. Suddenly, these bits started to feel a lot more comfortable than how I previously presented. These bits also came in a way of dipping my feet into questioning my sexuality, as all of a sudden I started to realize, it's not that I was never into guys, but I had never really given it much thought. Turns out I found a boy that I started to fall for. We started to hang out and talk about a bunch of our favorite anime series and video games, and eventually one thing led to another, and now that same boy is now my boyfriend. I bring this up because he helps both become a pivotal part of not just my life, but also my transitioning journey. As I entered this new relationship, I felt much more comfortable to start expressing myself in ways that I felt too much shame to even dip my toes into. These expressions would start in ways such as a growing interest in women's fashion, but I still very sillily insisted that, oh, I'm okay with just being a femboy. Silly me. As I continued to really get into fashion, I developed a slight curiosity into other common aspects of women's lives and experiences, as we are more than just our fashion choices. As this continued on, the prelude to the big change in my life was knocking on that door. On the other side of that door was some strong gender dysphoria and gender envy, and I actively avoided looking at myself in the mirror as I didn't like how I had looked. Not that I had strong general self-esteem issues at this stage in my life, but any reminder of presenting myself as male just really started to upset me. It didn't fit. It didn't feel like I was able to be me this way. And trust me, men can get into their own fashion ordeals, but they just didn't fit me. It was around this time that I had started expressing my feeling of gender dysphoria to my boyfriend, who had already seen and pointed out some signs of me being an egg. And for those of you very confused, like, what do eggs have to do with this? It's a slang term typically used towards someone who's giving off soon-to-transition energy. And to many people, including my current partner and friends over the years, this is like a, oh, you're only realizing this now? Sort of moment. And it was also when I finally came to the realization of, hey, I think I should start seriously considering the idea that I might be trans. So I just went for it. It didn't start all guns blazing, but I started with changing the pronouns that I like to be referred to as. Firstly from my boyfriend, and then came coming out to my close friends and implementing the same. Although there was some internal shyness at first, even when coming out to people I hold dearly, they were always supportive from the very start. Then I started to look into ways to feminize my appearance. I changed up my fashion a bit and got a few clothes inspired by some stuff I found on Pinterest. I also let my hair grow out a bit while getting some cute bags. All these little changes felt right, and I was starting to develop a sense of not just confidence in the way I was presenting, but in a way that I never felt before. I felt happy in who I was and who I had further become. One of the fun ways that I was able to further reflect the changes I was making was with my Vtuber model. No longer was I claiming myself as a femboy, and instead was now a full-on girly. My boyfriend and I sat down for a while to come up with a brand new design that reflected how I wish to portray myself in the Vtuber space, and we landed on what you've been looking at for the entire video. It also seems more space queenie too. Next up came a part that was incredibly nerve-wracking and required a lot of built-up courage, and that was coming out to family. Growing up, I was raised in a Bangladeshi household to Muslim parents, which heavily complicates things, and it had me worried about how I'd be perceived at first. But before I could think about the entire family tree, I really felt that I needed to tell my mom. So in a swift conversation, also throwing in the fact that I was dating a boy, came with a lot of concern from my mom's end. It was bittersweet, as a lot of this is really, really new to her. She had concerns about mainly how other people perceived it. She first started to bargain and say that I should probably wait to transition once I leave home to live on my own. She also suggested I go see a doctor because she wasn't convinced about my plan to transition. I agreed on going to see the doctor part and took my next steps, not needing some parent approval. Oh, and my brother found it really quick and easy to accept me. It was really sweet. Big big supporter of mine, and I appreciate you very, very much if you happen to be watching this or overhearing this from your room. Now, the following section has some conversations related to health. I would like to emphasize that I am not a licensed healthcare provider, and I'm just commenting on my experiences, okay? Capiche? Capiche. So, to the doctors I went. My first doctor wasn't entirely the most helpful. As a family doctor, their skill set is limited to general practitioner stuff, and it required someone who is experienced in gender-affirming therapy to properly evaluate my situation. So, after looking at some doctors I could be referred to, I finally moved on to a doctor that could help me. After some conversations about how I got here and some blood tests, I was able to get started on HRT pretty much immediately. Oh, and as a Red Bull girly myself, love Red Bull, I couldn't have them as prolifically anymore. Turns out the liver carries out some important bodily functions that you probably shouldn't interfere with. One other thing that I'd like to point out is that if you do plan to start, and this is advice to you guys getting started soon, please make sure that you have a plan in place to be able to comfortably afford and attain HRT. You do not want to find yourself in a situation where you're going on and off medication. I was fortunate enough to secure a relatively stable job for the time being a few months before affording my first doses, and I'm so grateful for that. Okay, so now in this segment, I'm going to describe the bodily changes during my transition so far. To put a rough estimate on it, I've still only been on HRT for less than a year. So first off came skin and hair changes. So both my skin and hair were relatively normal to oily before I had started HRT, but almost instantly, not only did they both dry up, but they kind of got satisfyingly soft. Shaving anywhere and putting lotion anywhere got an ample amount of times more satisfying. Heck, even writing this part of the script, I couldn't help myself from touching my cheek and observing how soft it was. On the hair front though, I quickly had to find shampoos and conditioner that kept my hair properly hydrated. Then, I actually made a change that HRT doesn't really affect all too much, at least not from my experiences, and that's to deal with some unwanted hair, specifically my face. When on HRT, what I've found is that it sort of reduces the amount of hair grown to an extent, but doesn't fully get rid of it. And when dealing with the face, I found that a big problem. So very early on in HRT, I went and got laser hair removal for my face. It set me back quite a bit, but the results for now seem worth it, especially as I was assured that an NDYAG laser, perfect for people with darker skin types, was being used. Now, I did end up getting some residual hyperpigmentation, and hyperpigmentation is a common condition that makes some areas of the skin darker than others. So if I don't find myself using sunscreen basically 24/7, it can get quite bad. And not that it gets horrible, but it's still relatively noticeable on my end to this point. I'm currently using some serums and a lot more sunscreen nowadays to combat that. Now this last part is one where I talk about some physical restructuring changes, but I can't go too far into it without risking this whole thing getting demonetized. But what I should be able to get away with talking about here is that my body has still changed quite a bit, particularly with the fat redistribution. My body quickly went from that square boxed rectangular shape that boys will typically have and turned it into a beautiful hourglass shape, and to me, that made me feel ecstatic. I felt these changes basically right away, not just feel, but I was able to see them, and clothing started to fit and hug places that I more or less wanted them to, and wow, just wow. Let's just say my hips would not lie. So now that we're done talking about some physical changes, let's talk about these social ones. A term that is often used in the trans community when they're making sure they're being identified properly in public situations is called passing. For me, in the early stages before I'd cut my hair a little, I quote unquote passed relatively easily. When I cut it to a bob length though, it sort of did the opposite. And I was surprised because I didn't think I'd look that much like a member of Queen. Now, what's important to reemphasize here is pixie cuts exist, and women can literally have any hairstyle they wish, and the same applies for others. But I can see why in your early stages, you would be so fixated at the idea of passing. I mean, I say you, but even I struggle with this. In addition to my previous concern over some hyperpigmentation on my face, keeping my hair longer for the time being as well, and using makeup tricks to hide that shadow helped me feel more confident this way. Another aspect socially that I found a bit unusual was feeling like I had a lot more attention towards me. When people perceive me as a woman now, I typically find that I can feel a whole new level of stares that I never felt identifying as a guy. I especially felt this on public transit. Older men will choose to sit next to me, people my rough age will start eyeing me up a bit, and you can just feel it. It's something that early on, I even talked to my fellow girlies about, with one even saying, "Oh, I thought that was normal." The last social aspect that I'd like to touch base on, and some people's favorite subject, washrooms. For me, it took me basically 8 to 9 months to feel like I had the courage and comfortable enough to step foot in a woman's public restroom without worrying about some transphobe harassing me. To put my 2 cents on the matter, I've heard of so many cases since this has become a big problem in the States where guys will literally barge into those washrooms just to kick a trans person out. The irony baffles me. But now we pit stop to talk about my emotions. As someone who has been responsible for a lot of things over the years, I typically have a pretty good head on my shoulders to make sure I have rational and mature judgments. When on HRT, however, it felt like I wanted to fight the world. It was basically going through puberty again, while also fighting my own intense emotion. If I was angry, I'd feel very angry. If I was overjoyed by something, the euphoria couldn't be topped. So when you couple someone who tries to behave rationally and maturely when not in the repo context, it really felt like I was scolding myself for feeling such feelings so strongly, mostly for the negative ones though. I've come to really embrace these levels of happiness, and I'm actually very grateful for it. The second last point I want to get across to is my wardrobe. Other than it being a jumbled mess, there are some factors I had to consider when restructuring it over the past year. First off, anything skin tight for down there was a no-go for me. I'd prefer not to draw any sort of attention to it, and thus found specific types of undergarments to help mask it. A godsend for me was anything denim. Even with tight-fitting ones, my curves did all the work for the overall look and made me feel great and confident wearing them around. This is also a great option if in the early stages you wanted to make subtle changes like I had from the very beginning. Next, I typically don't get anything too expensive at this stage of my transition. After getting some essentials like flexible bras for when my chest was developing, or pieces of clothing that I could wear every day, like those pairs of denim jeans that I was talking about before, I just started experimenting with different articles of clothing and saw how they fit me and made me feel. Some were utter fails, but having bought them for cheap, they would still serve their purpose to me. Plus, I'm anticipating my body to change a lot over the next few years, and the last thing I want is to spend loads on clothes that just don't fit me anymore or suit me anymore. And last but not least, let's talk about my experience with voice training. Voice training was a great way to make my voice a little more feminine while also still letting it be me. To achieve the voice I have now rather than the voice I had probably until last year.
We end on that fun fact or whatever, and let's head on to our just chatting.
It required a bit of repetition and practice. Very similarly to how people get in tune, I started tuning my voice through finding something to say, in my case, ang. So the following sentences that preceded the ang would try to sustain that same pitch and resonance. I'm no expert to this, and like my doctor even told me, there are some good resources online if you're looking to transform your voice. Yuko EX is a big favorite of mine. Now, this isn't something by any means that a prerequisite for trans people is to voice train. If you are worried about a passing voice, this is probably something of an avenue that you explore, but if you're comfortable with it, girly, say your shit however you want to. Also, one other thing that I nearly forgot to say, one thing that really helped me, I also made sure that whenever I thought of something with my internal voice, I am realizing that not everyone has it, but to those of you who do, please try this and let me know if it actually works or not, is talk in the voice that you would also like to have. So if you'd like to have a higher pitch voice, you would speak in that higher pitch voice in your head. Again, took a lot of practice, but I'm no expert either. Like my doctor even told me, there are some other good resources online if you're looking to transform your voice. But if you don't care, you embrace what you got, girly pop. Okay, we are finally at the end of the video, and let me just say a big thank you to those of you who have decided to watch the whole freaking thing, MVP behavior, but also to those of you who probably skipped through and watched the parts that were relevant to you or that you were most interested in. I tried to cover as many aspects of the transition that I could come up with along with my partner, and if there was any part that you were interested in, maybe I'll make a follow-up Q&A from any questions you may have for me in the comments. I don't usually have a proper outro. I usually tell people off or something. I'm being silly, okay? I'm not a hate crimer, but I will see you off here. Subscribe if you wish. Bye-bye, and ciao for now.